They called him the Night Stalker, not because he crept through dreams, but because he turned them into nightmares. He didn't have a pattern. He didn't have a type. He didn't even have a reason. What he had was darkness, and a key to the city of Los Angeles in the form of an unlocked door. From 1984 to 1985, he hunted like a phantom. He left behind symbols, blood, and a city too afraid to sleep. He believed he was chosen. He believed he wasn't alone. But this story isn't about belief. It's about what happens when the devil stops knocking and starts walking straight through your front door. This is Screw Crime, and this is Richard Ramirez. The door was always unlocked. Los Angeles, 1984. The summer heat sat heavy over the city like a punishment. It didn't matter if you lived in a house with a view of the hills or a cracked apartment off the 101. Everyone kept their windows cracked, their doors ajar, hoping for a whisper of cool air. The city pulsed with life and sin, and in the deepest corners of that city, something darker had begun to stir. The first time Richard Ramirez saw a door left unlocked, he called it God's invitation. He didn't believe in God, not the way others did, not the kind that offered mercy or protection. The God Ramirez worshipped was faceless, ancient, and soaked in blood. He believed in chaos, and by 24, he was ready to become its messenger. He had the look of a man who belonged on a different plane, tall, gaunt, hungry in the eyes. His teeth were rotted, his breath sour with decay and psychosis. But it was his presence that haunted, like the room got colder when he entered, like death walked on two legs. By June of 1984, the city had already tasted his shadow. Jenny Vincow, 79, found brutally murdered in her own bed, stabbed repeatedly, nearly decapitated. Her apartment had been left open, her body defiled. Her son had found her. What kind of son has to see that? The headlines didn't say. The headlines didn't care. The cops thought it was random. Just another break-in gone sideways. But Ramirez wasn't done. He had just started carving his gospel into the bones of Los Angeles. He would drive all night in a stolen car, coked up, eyes wide, looking for weakness. He didn't care what neighborhood it was, East LA, Glendale, Mission Viejo. No one was safe. He didn't care who lived inside. Old, young, man, woman, child, it didn't matter. All he needed was an unlocked door and a willing demon whispering in his ear. And those whispers were constant. People who survive violence talk about the moment before it happens. They say they feel it, an energy, a warning. But when Richard Ramirez crept through your window, there was no warning, no buildup, just silence, and then breath. His victims told stories that sounded like dreams or nightmares, where they woke up to see a shadow above them, a face smeared in darkness, a voice saying, "Don't move," and then the knife, or the gun, or worse. The media didn't know what to call him at first. The walk-in killer, the Valley Intruder. But nothing stuck until someone said the words, Night Stalker. That name, it clicked. It crawled under the skin of the city. It made people lock their doors. It made them check their windows 3 times before sleeping. It made Los Angeles afraid of the dark. But while the city feared him, Ramirez grew stronger. Every headline gave him power. Every panic gave him purpose. In private, he read books on Satanism, drew pentagrams on hotel walls, listened to AC/DC, and claimed the devil spoke through the music. But the truth was simpler. He was broken long before the devil came knocking. His cousin, a Vietnam vet, had shown him photos of raped and decapitated women when he was a boy, showed him how to kill, how to dehumanize. And when that same cousin murdered his wife in front of Richard's eyes, something snapped. Or maybe something was born. The boy who saw that murder became the man who made his own. And the thing that terrified people most? He didn't just kill. He toyed with his victims. He laughed at their fear. He'd rape someone in one room while their partner lay bleeding out in the other. He'd tell survivors to swear to Satan. He wanted their pain. He fed on it. The detectives chasing him didn't know it yet, but they weren't hunting a man. They were chasing a shadow with teeth. Los Angeles was bleeding, and the night stalker was still hungry. A face in the darkness. By the time the summer of 1984 faded into fall, Los Angeles had changed. The city wasn't sleeping easy anymore. Bedroom doors were locked. Security lights flickered on at every gust of wind. Even in neighborhoods where crime was rare, people were glancing twice at their windows. Because they all knew. Someone was out there. What made the fear worse was that no one knew what kind of monster they were dealing with. There was no clear pattern. One night it was a couple in the suburbs. The next it was a single woman in the city. Sometimes he took things. Sometimes he left symbols. Every time he left destruction. He didn't follow rules. That's what made him impossible to predict and harder to catch. In March of 1985, the unknown suspect struck again. A young woman, Maria Hernandez, was pulling into her garage in Rosemead. He approached her from behind. What should have been her last moment turned into a miracle. Something she was holding deflected the bullet. She lived. But inside the house, her roommate, Dale Okazaki, wasn't so lucky. The intruder followed and acted without hesitation. The city was rattled. The very next day, he attacked again. Tsai Lian-yu was driving through Monterey Park when he confronted her in broad daylight. He demanded her vehicle, and she was shot when she hesitated. It was becoming clear. This was no longer a secret threat. This was a full-on siege. Detectives scrambled. The pressure was on. The media dubbed the unknown killer the walk-in killer, then the Valley Intruder. But none of the names stuck, because none captured the dread he was spreading. Not yet. In April, the intruder targeted Vincent and Maxine Zazara in Whittier. Vincent, in his 60s, never stood a chance. Maxine woke up to find a stranger in the home. What followed was an act of extreme cruelty. More than just violence, it was psychological domination. When law enforcement arrived, they found something deeply disturbing, a deliberate and symbolic scene. That's when detectives realized this wasn't just about theft or even murder. This person was acting on belief, ritual, power. He wasn't choosing his victims based on wealth, race, age, or gender. He was choosing based on opportunity, open doors, sliding windows, human error. Each crime left behind pieces, footprints, shoe prints, occasional smudged symbols. It became clear he was leaving marks intentionally. He wanted people to know he'd been there, to remember. This was more than a killing spree. It was performance. But the fear wasn't just about the crimes. It was about the unknown. He didn't follow a clear timeline. Sometimes weeks would go by with nothing. Then he'd strike 3 times in a weekend. He'd target entire homes, then isolate one person. He kept the city on edge. In one attack, a teenage girl named Whitney Bennett was left for dead. But she survived. What she remembered wasn't just the fear or the pain. It was the feeling that the attacker believed he was untouchable, that he was on a mission. Los Angeles was unraveling. People were buying locks in bulk. Gun shops couldn't keep inventory. Neighborhood watch groups formed overnight. Parents taught their children to sleep with the door locked and the lights on. And still, He moved through the city like fog. The detectives had fragments, shoe prints from Avia sneakers, a general description: tall, thin, sunken eyes, wild hair, teeth in poor condition, but nothing solid enough to act on. They were chasing smoke. Meanwhile, the press stirred panic. Headlines grew bolder. Radio hosts whispered about satanic rituals. Local news ran warnings nightly. It was no longer about solving a case. It was about keeping an entire city from losing its mind. And finally, a name stuck: the Night Stalker. It wasn't just catchy. It was accurate. He didn't just kill at night. He hunted, waited, watched, and then struck like a phantom. But for Richard Ramirez, this wasn't chaos. It was clarity. He believed he was channeling something darker, something powerful, and in his mind, he was just getting started. Signs and shadows. By the summer of 1985, Los Angeles wasn't just afraid, it was paralyzed. The city had developed a nervous system, one wired into the evening news and crackling with dread. Every new report of a break-in, every whisper of a home invasion sparked a fresh wave of panic. Parents kept kids home from sleepovers. Storefronts sold out of locks, flashlights, and prayer candles. The Night Stalker had become more than a man. He was a myth with teeth. What the public didn't know was that behind the scenes, law enforcement had started to piece together a web. Footprints left behind in multiple homes matched a single type of shoe: Avia sneakers. Not common, not cheap. Only one pair in that size had been sold in the area. That print became gold. Detectives also had composite sketches from survivors, each slightly different, but all sharing the same elements: gaunt face, intense eyes, unkempt hair, and a strange, hollow energy. One victim described him as like a statue that came alive. Still, every clue led to more frustration. Fingerprints were partial. Vehicle descriptions were vague. Most of the time, the Night Stalker drove stolen cars and ditched them within days. He left behind just enough to scare the city, never enough to catch him. But fate has a way of bending. In late July, a young boy in the Mission Viejo area noticed something strange: a suspicious man circling a neighborhood. The boy told his parents, and his father, a detail-oriented man, memorized part of the car's license plate. That single act, that moment of awareness, would begin to turn the tide. The detectives tracked the plate to a stolen Toyota. Inside the car, they found a single fingerprint on the rearview mirror. At last, something usable. Meanwhile, the city watched as the case reached national attention. Press conferences were no longer cautious. They were loud and urgent. A name was coming into focus. A story was forming. The fingerprint came back with a match: Richard Ramirez, a 25-year-old drifter with a lengthy rap sheet for theft, carjackings, and drug use. Born in El Paso, Texas, lived in motels, hung around Greyhound stations. He had no job, no permanent address, but a history of darkness. Detectives now had a face, a name, a trail. They released his photo to the public on August 30th, 1985. It was broadcast on every major news outlet in California. "This is who we're looking for," they said. "This is the Night Stalker." And that's when everything shifted. The man who once moved like a ghost found himself under a spotlight. Richard Ramirez had been hiding in plain sight for months. But now, with his face on every TV screen and newspaper front page, his illusion of invisibility shattered. The very next morning, he walked into a convenience store in East LA. He didn't realize he was famous yet, but the cashier recognized him. So did a few other customers. Someone pointed, someone whispered, then someone shouted, That's him! That's the guy! Ramirez ran, sprinting through streets and backyards, hopping fences, desperate to vanish again. But the city, terrified and exhausted, had decided it was done hiding. An entire neighborhood rose up. People chased him. A group surrounded him. One man struck him with a metal pipe to keep him from escaping. Police arrived moments later. Ramirez was bleeding, confused, handcuffed. He looked up at the crowd and grinned. That image would be burned into the city's memory, a monster captured not by elite detectives, but by the people themselves. The nightmare was over, or so it seemed. Ramirez was in custody. The city exhaled. But the trial? That would be a spectacle all its own. Courtroom theater. When Richard Ramirez was captured in August of 1985, Los Angeles breathed again. But peace was temporary. What came next wasn't quiet justice. It was chaos in a courtroom. From the moment Ramirez was arrested, it was clear this wouldn't be a typical trial. His case was too large, too dark, and too rooted in public fear. He was charged with a staggering list of crimes: home invasions, multiple murders, assaults, and burglaries. But beyond the numbers was the spectacle. He made sure of it. When he entered the courtroom for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't apologetic. He wasn't even silent. He looked into the cameras and lifted his palm, revealing a crudely drawn pentagram scrawled in ink. "Hail Satan," he said, smiling. The room fell silent. For most people, a trial is a reckoning. For Richard Ramirez, it was theater. He showed up in dark clothing, sunglasses, hair slicked back. He knew the cameras were watching. In his mind, he was already a legend, and he intended to act like one. Outside the courthouse, a different kind of madness brewed. Young women gathered daily, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Some sent letters. Others claimed to be in love. They called him misunderstood, tragic. They talked about his cheekbones, his voice. Some even showed up wearing black veils like it was a rock concert. The press called them groupies. Psychologists called it hybristophilia, the attraction to someone who commits violent crimes. But for Richard, it was validation. He didn't just want to be feared. He wanted to be admired. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution laid out a mountain of evidence. Survivors testified. Forensic experts linked bullets, shoe prints, and even fingerprints. One key witness described being spared by Ramirez, who told her to tell them the night stalker was here. It was like he wanted to be caught, wanted the world to say his name. Defense attorneys struggled. They tried to argue mental instability, but even that path was difficult, because Ramirez seemed all too aware of what he was doing. He was intelligent, calculated, and eerily composed. Psychologists who evaluated him painted a complex picture: antisocial behavior, likely trauma, and a deep fascination with death, dominance, and the occult. But no formal diagnosis could fully explain the cold, deliberate nature of his actions. When the prosecution revealed the full timeline of the crimes, from 1984 to 1985, it was clear. He had operated with precision. There was randomness in his choice of victims, but consistency in his method. He didn't break into homes by chance. He studied them, picked houses with poor lighting, easy access, or residents who appeared vulnerable. The signs weren't just in blood. They were in the way he hunted. The trial stretched on for years. Witnesses recounted chilling memories. Evidence was dissected down to the smallest fiber. But even in a courtroom full of tragedy, Richard Ramirez never flinched. He laughed sometimes. He winked at people. He looked straight into the cameras, like he was already immortal. In 1989, the verdict came down. Guilty on 13 counts of murder, multiple counts of burglary, assault, and attempted murder. The jury recommended the death penalty. The judge called the crimes cruel, callous, and beyond human understanding. When asked for a final statement, Ramirez didn't apologize. He didn't reflect. Instead, he said, "Big deal. Death always comes with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." It was a final reminder of what they were dealing with. Not just a criminal, but a man who had rejected all forms of remorse. He had created his own mythology, and now he planned to live inside it. After sentencing, he was sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he remained on death row. But even in confinement, letters kept arriving. Interview requests piled up. Writers and documentarians circled like vultures. And still, Richard Ramirez never gave the world what it wanted: closure. He remained a shadow in the national psyche, a reminder that sometimes evil isn't hiding. Sometimes it's waving at the camera, the afterimage. After the sentencing in 1989, Richard Ramirez entered a new phase of existence, one far away from the streets he once stalked. San Quentin State Prison became his world. Death row, his new theater. The bars didn't silence him, but they did contain him. He was locked away, but not erased. For the justice system, it was a win. A terrifying chapter had been closed. But for the public, Ramirez still lingered, in dreams, in headlines, in the static glow of old television clips. He wasn't just remembered. He was studied, analyzed, and sensationalized. In prison, Ramirez remained largely the same: aloof, unreadable, and strangely calm. He gave interviews that revealed little but hinted at much. He spoke about his beliefs with unnerving confidence, often returning to themes of fate, darkness, and a rejection of conventional morality. He didn't seek forgiveness. He didn't show regret. He did, however, gain admirers. Letters continued to flood in. Not all were morbid. Some were from curious minds. Others were from fans. One, from a woman named Doreen Leoy, turned into something more. In 1996, the two were married inside the prison. It was a headline the world couldn't resist: a convicted serial killer marrying someone who believed in his innocence, or at least believed in the person behind the name. But even as time passed and Ramirez faded from the daily news cycle, his image remained frozen in pop culture. His mugshot, with wild eyes and defiant energy, became iconic. It was printed on T-shirts, used in documentaries, and posted across online forums. He had become a symbol, not a hero, not even fully human, but a figure that represented something deeply unsettling about human nature. People wanted to understand him, to explain how a boy from El Paso became a man who terrorized a city. They studied his childhood, his family life, the trauma he witnessed, the influence of a cousin who had returned from war twisted and violent. There were patterns, sure: abuse, neglect, addiction, but none of them, alone or together, ever seemed enough to justify the leap from troubled youth to what he became. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. There is no single reason, no neat explanation. Ramirez's case became a staple in criminal psychology classes, forensic documentaries, and true crime media. His name sat on lists next to Bundy, Gacy, and Dahmer. Not because his crimes were identical, but because his presence was unforgettable. He was different, unpredictable. He didn't just take lives. He shifted the energy of an entire city. But time caught up with him too. In 2013, Richard Ramirez died in custody. Not by execution, but from complications related to B-cell lymphoma. He was 53 years old. He had spent more time on death row than he had as a free man. There were no nationwide vigils, no public outcry. But in the corners of the internet and late-night podcast episodes, his story refused to die. Because the story of the Night Stalker isn't just about one man, it's about the shadow he left behind. He changed how people lock their doors, how they think about safety, how they watch the dark. He's part of the reason true crime is more than just entertainment. It's a mirror reflecting what people fear most. That evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it walks into your house when the window's cracked open. Sometimes it leaves a footprint and disappears into the night. And sometimes it gets caught. But even then, the myth lingers. So if you're up late at night, watching your curtains shift in the breeze, just know the Night Stalker is gone. But the fear he created, still very much alive. Outro segment. What if he got away? Let's play with the devil's dice for a second. What if Richard Ramirez had never been caught? What if he had burned every pair of those Avia sneakers, wiped down every car he stole with bleach, avoided the thrill of press headlines and kept his ego buried, killed the lights in his mind and vanished into the desert, never let the cameras see his face? Would we still be telling this story, or would he be watching this episode right now from the shadows? Now let's flip it back to you. Answer this in the comments. Do you think he wanted to get caught? Was Ramirez evil or empty? If you were on the jury, would you have voted for the death penalty? Why do you think some people were attracted to him? Who do you want us to dig up next? Drop your answers below. Want to support Screw Crime? Pay your tribute. CashApp, $forrestjob. PayPal, a Divine Destiny LLC at gmail.com. We're donation-based, dark-coded, and always watching the watchers. Subscribe for more episodes. We don't do bedtime stories. We do the ones that keep you awake. This is Screw Crime. The monsters may die, but their shadows stay with us.